What police found inside this mom's apartment shocked everyone. The moment hit her like a sudden crash. Talia froze in the small, cold interview room. A police officer sat across from her, calm, steady, watching her every move. Another stood near the door, silent like a shadow. The camera in the corner blinked red. Then the officer spoke. "We've been to your apartment." Those words hung in the air. Talia's face didn't move at first, but her eyes did. They widened just a little, then a little more. "And we saw your son." Silence. A long, heavy silence. The kind that feels like it's pressing down on your chest. Talia swallowed hard. Her hands, resting on the table, began to shake. She pulled them back, hiding them under her arms. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice thin and shaky. The officer leaned forward slightly. "He's in very bad condition." Talia blinked. "What?" Twice. Then she shook her head slowly. No, he's just sick," she said. "He's always been sick." But the officer didn't look convinced. "We found him locked in a room," he said. "He weighs almost nothing." Another pause. "And Talia, the house, it's not normal." That was the moment. That was when it broke. Talia's lips parted, but no words came out. Her breathing got faster. Her eyes darted around the room like she was trying to find a way out. Because she knew. She knew they had seen everything. The smell. The filth. The truth. And just as the officer opened a folder and slid a photo across the table, Talia whispered, "Can I see my son?" But the officer didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at her carefully. Because something about this story didn't make sense. And what they had just found inside that apartment was only the beginning. Hours earlier, the morning had started like any other. Cold, quiet, gray. It was New Year's Day, and most people were still asleep after celebrating the night before. Streets were empty. Houses were silent. But at 9:17 a.m., a 911 call changed everything. A shaky voice spoke into the phone. I think something's wrong with my nephew," the caller said. "He's not moving." The dispatcher asked questions quickly. "Is he breathing?" "I don't know." "I don't think so." "What's your address?" There was a pause. Then the address came through. Within minutes, police officers and paramedics were on their way. The apartment building looked normal from the outside. Just another place where families lived. Nothing strange. Nothing out of place. But the moment they stepped inside, something felt wrong. The smell hit first. Strong. Sour. Like something had been rotting for a long time. One officer covered his nose. "Do you smell that?" he asked. Another nodded. "Yeah. Something's not right." They followed the caller, a young woman named Brianna, down a narrow hallway. Her hands were shaking. "It's in here," she said, pointing to a closed door. The door had a lock on the outside. That alone made the officers pause. "Who locks a door from the outside?" one of them whispered. Brianna stepped back. "My aunt, she said it was for his safety," she said quietly. The officer reached for the handle. It was locked. "Step back," he said. With one quick motion, he forced the door open. The smell became unbearable. And what they saw inside, none of them would ever forget. A small body lay on the bed. Too small. Too thin. The boy looked like he hadn't eaten in weeks, maybe months. His arms were like sticks. His ribs showed through his skin. His face was hollow, his eyes closed. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. "Jesus," one officer whispered. Paramedics rushed in, pushing past the officers. They checked for a pulse. Nothing. They tried CPR. Nothing. The room was silent except for the sound of their hands pressing against his chest. Again and again. But it was too late. The boy was gone. One of the paramedics stood up slowly. "He's dead," she said softly. No one spoke. The officers looked around the room. It was worse than they thought. The walls were dirty. The floor was covered in trash. There were stains everywhere. And the smell. It wasn't just coming from the boy. It was coming from everything. "How long has he been in here?" one officer asked. Brianna stood in the doorway crying. I don't know," she said. "My aunt wouldn't let anyone see him." The officer turned to her. "When was the last time you saw him?" She hesitated. I think it's been months." Months. The word echoed in the room. The officers exchanged looks. Something was very, very wrong. At the same time, another team of officers was heading to the police station with Talia. She had been calm at first. Too calm. Sitting in the back of the patrol car, she stared out the window like nothing was happening. "Your sister said your son is hurt," one officer told her. Talia nodded slowly. He's sick, she replied. How long has he been sick? Since he was little. What kind of sickness? Talia paused. I don't know, a lot of things, she said. Her answers were short, vague, like she didn't want to say too much. At the station they brought her into the interview room. And that's where the story really began. Back in the apartment, officers continued to search. Every room told a different story. The kitchen was a mess. Old food, dirty dishes, trash piled high. The living room had a couch, but it was covered in clothes and stains. Nothing looked clean. Nothing looked safe. This isn't just neglect, one officer said. This is something else. They found more locks on doors. More signs that someone had been kept inside. And then, in a corner of the apartment, they found something that made everything worse. A scale. Dusty. But still working. Next to it were notes. Numbers written down. Dates. Weights. The officers looked at each other. Is this his weight? One asked. Another nodded slowly. The numbers were going down. Lower and lower. Over time. Until they reached a number that made one officer shake his head. 33 pounds, he said. That can't be right. But it was. That was the last number written. 33 pounds. For a 14-year-old boy. Back in the interrogation room, the officer slid the photo across the table. Talia looked down at it. And everything changed. Her face twisted. Her eyes filled with tears. But something about it didn't feel real. Not like a mother seeing her child. More like someone caught in a lie. He was sick, she said again, her voice breaking. The officer didn't respond. Instead, he asked a simple question. Why was he locked in that room, Talia? She didn't answer. Her breathing got faster. Her hands shook again. Why didn't anyone see him for months? The officer continued. Still no answer. Talia, we need the truth. She looked up. And for a second, just a second, something dark passed through her eyes. Then she whispered, I was trying to help him. The officer leaned back. Help him how? Talia opened her mouth. But before she could speak, the door suddenly opened. Another officer stepped in quickly. He looked serious. Urgent. We need you, he said to the detective. Now. The detective stood up. What is it? The officer glanced at Talia, then back at the detective. He didn't make it, he said quietly. The room went still. The detective turned slowly. And Talia? Talia stopped breathing for a moment. Because deep down, she already knew. And as the reality finally began to sink in, the story was about to take a much darker turn. The words hit the room like a thunderclap. He didn't make it. For a second no one moved. Talia sat frozen in her chair, her eyes wide, her lips slightly open. The detective stood still, watching her closely, waiting for something, anything. A normal reaction. A mother's reaction. But it didn't come. Instead, Talia blinked slowly, like she was trying to process something far away. No, she whispered. It didn't sound like shock. It sounded like fear. The detective took a step closer to the table. Talia, he said gently, your son has died. This time her body reacted. She shook her head fast, over and over again. No, he was fine, he was breathing, he was just sick. Her voice cracked, but there were no tears. Not yet. He needed help, she added quickly. I was taking care of him. The detective pulled out his chair and sat down again, his eyes locked on her. Then help us understand, he said. Because what we saw, that's not care. Talia's breathing became uneven. She wrapped her arms around herself like she was cold. I did everything I could, she said. No one understands. Then explain it, the detective replied. Silence. A long, heavy silence. Talia stared at the table. And then, slowly she began to speak. He was always different, she said softly. Her voice had changed. It was calmer now. Almost distant. Zaki, he wasn't like other kids. He got sick a lot. He couldn't eat certain foods. Doctors didn't know what was wrong with him. The detective listened carefully. What doctors? He asked. Talia hesitated. Different ones, she said. We moved around. Do you have their names? She shook her head. I don't remember. The detective made a note. And when was the last time he saw a doctor? Another pause. A while ago, she admitted. How long is a while? Talia's fingers tightened against her arms. I don't know, maybe a year. The detective raised an eyebrow. A year? He repeated. She didn't answer. Back at the apartment, the investigation was getting deeper. More officers had arrived. The building was now filled with quiet voices and heavy footsteps. A crime scene unit carefully moved through the rooms, taking photos, collecting evidence. Every detail mattered. Every stain. Every object. Every smell. In the small locked room, the one where Zaki had been found, an officer stood still for a moment, looking around. It felt wrong. Everything about it. There were no toys. No books. Nothing that made it feel like a child lived there. Just a mattress. A thin blanket. And darkness. This wasn't a bedroom, the officer said quietly. Another officer nodded. It was a cage. In another part of the apartment, investigators spoke with neighbors. A woman in her 40s stood in the hallway, arms crossed tightly. I didn't even know there was a kid in there, she said. I never saw him. Did you hear anything? An officer asked. She thought for a moment. Sometimes. I heard crying, she said slowly. But it was quiet. Like someone trying not to be heard. The officer wrote it down. How often? Not much. Maybe once in a while. Did you ever report it? The woman looked away. I didn't think it was serious, she said. I thought maybe he was just being punished or something. Her voice got quieter. I wish I had said something now. Back in the interrogation room, the detective leaned forward again. Talia, your son was severely malnourished, he said. Do you know what that means? She nodded slowly. He couldn't eat, she said quickly. I told you. No, the detective said firmly. This isn't just a child who couldn't eat. This is a child who wasn't fed. Talia's eyes flashed. That's not true, she snapped. Then explain the notes we found. She froze. What notes? She asked. The detective slid another photo across the table. The scale. The numbers. The dates. Talia looked down at it, her face pale. Why were you tracking his weight? The detective asked. I was trying to help him, she said again, her voice weaker now. Help him? Or control him? Talia shook her head fast. No, I was helping him. Then why did his weight keep dropping? No answer. Talia, the detective said, his voice sharper now, a 14-year-old boy should not weigh 33 pounds. Her hands began to shake again. You don't understand, she whispered. Then make me understand. Talia looked up. And this time there was something else in her eyes. Not just fear. Not just panic. Something darker. I had to keep him safe, she said. Safe from what? She hesitated. Then she leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. From himself. The detective frowned. What does that mean? He would hurt himself, she said quickly. He didn't know what he was doing. He needed to be controlled. Controlled? The detective repeated. Talia nodded. That's why I kept him in the room, she said. So he wouldn't hurt himself. The detective stared at her. And the food? He asked. Was that to protect him too? Talia didn't answer. At that same moment, another interview was taking place in a different room. Talia's older son, Marcus, sat across from another detective. He looked nervous, scared. How often did you see your brother? The detective asked. Marcus shrugged slightly. Not much, he said. Why not? My mom didn't let us go in his room. Did you ever try? He shook his head. No, she would get mad. What did she say? That he was sick, and we could make it worse. The detective nodded. Did you ever bring him food? Marcus hesitated. Sometimes, he said quietly. What happened when you did? He looked down at his hands. She would take it away. The room went silent. Why? The detective asked. Marcus swallowed hard. She said it wasn't good for him. Back in Talia's interrogation, the pressure was building. The detective could feel it. The cracks were starting to show. Talia, he said, his voice calm but firm, we've spoken to your family. Her head snapped up. What did they say? She asked quickly. They told us they weren't allowed to see Zaki. Talia shook her head. That's not true. They told us you kept him hidden. No. They told us you controlled everything. No. Her voice was louder now. Shaking. Breaking. They don't understand, she shouted. None of them understand. The detective didn't react. He just watched her. Then help me understand, he said again. Talia's breathing was fast now. Her chest rising and falling quickly. Tears finally filled her eyes. I was trying to save him, she said. From what? The detective asked. She opened her mouth. But no words came out. Because deep down, there was no answer that made sense. Back at the apartment, the medical examiner arrived. The small room grew even quieter as they carefully prepared to move Zaki's body. One officer stood near the door, his face tense. Another looked away. No one spoke, because some scenes stay with you forever. And this was one of them. As they lifted the boy gently, something fell from the bed. A small piece of paper. One of the officers picked it up. It was a note, written in shaky handwriting. 3 simple words. Please help me. The officer froze. And in that moment, the case changed. Because this wasn't just neglect. This wasn't just control. This was something much worse. And back in the station, as Talia sat in that cold room, trying to explain the unexplainable, she had no idea that the evidence was already stacking up against her. And the truth was getting closer than ever. Please help me. The words echoed in the officer's mind as he stared at the small piece of paper. It felt heavy. Too heavy for something so small. He looked around the room again, the bare mattress, the stained walls, the silence that felt almost alive. This wasn't just a place where someone lived. This was a place where someone suffered. For a long time. He carefully placed the note into an evidence bag, his hands slower now, more careful. Because this was proof. Back at the station, Talia sat alone for a moment. The room felt colder now. Quieter. The noise in her head was louder than anything else. She stared at the table, her fingers tapping softly over and over again. Then the door opened. The detective walked back in. But this time something was different. His face was harder. More certain. He sat down slowly and placed a file on the table. We found something, he said. Talia didn't look up. What? She asked. The detective opened the file. A note, he said. From your son. That made her freeze. Slowly, very slowly, she lifted her head. A note, she repeated. The detective nodded. It says, please help me. Silence. Talia's lips trembled. Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time they didn't fall. I didn't see that, she said quickly. The detective didn't respond right away. He just watched her. Because now every word mattered. Tell me what happened, Talia, he said. Her breathing got faster. I told you he was sick, she said. The detective leaned forward. No, he said firmly. He was starving. Talia shook her head. No, that's not true. He was locked in a room. I was protecting him. He was begging for help. I didn't see it. Her voice cracked. Louder now. More desperate. I didn't see it, she shouted. The room went silent again. The detective sat back, letting the moment settle. Because this was it. This was where the truth either came out, or stayed buried forever. Hours passed. Interviews continued. Evidence piled up. Piece by piece, the story was becoming clear. And it was worse than anyone had imagined. Family members were brought in. One by one. Each with their own version of the truth. Talia's sister sat in a small room, her hands shaking. I tried to see him, she said through tears. She wouldn't let me. Did you ever report it? An officer asked. She shook her head. I should have. I know I should have. Her voice broke. But she said he was sick. She said doctors told her to keep him isolated. Did you believe her? At first she nodded. But then. No, she whispered. Not really. Another relative, Brianna, spoke next. She kept him hidden, she said. Like he wasn't even there. Did you ever see him recently? The officer asked. Brianna hesitated. Once, she said. When? A few months ago. What did he look like? Brianna's eyes filled with tears. Small, she whispered. Too small. The room fell quiet. Did you do anything? The officer asked gently. Brianna looked down. No, she said. And that one word said everything. Back in the interrogation room, Talia looked tired now. Drained. Like something inside her was slowly breaking apart. The detective placed more photos on the table. The room. The scale. The notes. Each one like a piece of a puzzle she could no longer avoid. This is your home, he said. She nodded weakly. This is your son's room. Another nod. And this, he said, pointing to the scale, this is what you used to track his weight. Talia swallowed hard. Yes, she admitted. Why? She closed her eyes. For his health, she said. The detective shook his head slightly. No, he said. This wasn't about health. Talia didn't respond. This was about control. Her eyes opened. No, she whispered. You decided when he ate. I was helping him. You decided when he could leave the room. He wasn't safe. You decided everything. Stop, she screamed. The sound filled the room. Sure. Loud. Final. Tears streamed down her face now. Real tears. I did what I had to do, she cried. You don't understand. The detective didn't raise his voice. He didn't move. He just asked one question. Did you ever think he might die? That question changed everything. Talia froze. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out, because for the first time, she had no answer. The truth didn't come out all at once. It came slowly, in pieces, like a story she didn't want to tell, but couldn't hold back anymore. She talked about fear, about thinking her son was always sick, about believing no one else understood him. But the more she spoke, the less it made sense, because the evidence didn't match her words. Not even close. Doctors were contacted. Records were pulled. And what they found was clear. Zaki had no serious medical condition. Nothing that explained what had happened to him. Nothing that justified any of it. This wasn't sickness. This wasn't treatment. This was abuse. In the final hours of the interrogation, Talia sat quietly. The fight was gone. The energy, gone. Only silence remained. The detective closed the file in front of him. Talia, he said, his voice calm but firm, your son died because he was not fed. Because he was locked away. Because he was ignored. Tears rolled down her face. But she didn't argue anymore. She didn't shout. She didn't deny. She just sat there, listening. Because now, there was nothing left to say. Outside the sun was setting. The first day of the new year was coming to an end. But for everyone involved, this was only the beginning. In the weeks that followed, the case spread across the country. People were shocked, angry, heartbroken. How could this happen? They asked. But there was no easy answer. Because sometimes, the truth is simple and terrible. In court, the evidence was overwhelming. The photos, the notes, the testimonies, and that small piece of paper. Please help me. It was shown to the jury. And the room went silent. Because those 3 words said more than anything else ever could. When the verdict came, it was clear. Guilty. The judge spoke firmly as the sentence was given. And as Talia stood there listening, she didn't cry. She didn't react. She just stared ahead, like she was somewhere else. But the story didn't end with her. Because behind every case like this, there are questions that stay. Questions that don't go away. What if someone had spoken up sooner? What if someone had knocked on that door? What if someone had listened? And the biggest question of all, how many signs were missed? Because in the end, the truth was there all along. Hidden behind closed doors. Waiting to be seen. Waiting to be heard. Waiting for someone to finally say, something is not right.